Welcome to the Penny for Your Thoughts podcast. This is your weekly insight into the small businesses of London. Today we're going to be talking to Toby Radcliffe, who is the co-founder of ZeroBees, and we are going to be finding out how and why your business should be reaching carbon zero. Thanks for joining us. Very excited to chat net zero today. What's the story of the business? What made you think this was the right thing to be doing? It sounds like it must have been a bit of a passion of yours.
Yeah, so Martin, my co-founder, and I actually have known each other for about 25 years. So we met at college. Martin was my best man when I got married. I think the first place I owned or part-owned in London was with Martin because neither of us could afford to buy a place. Yeah, so we've been friends for decades. And COVID kind of came around. And I'd been progressively kind of moving through my career, which involved sustainability, but also corporate brand side as well. But progressively moving into smaller and smaller, knowing that I wanted to go and do my own startup. And Martin had just actually exited. He was the CEO of Nutmeg. So he had a very, very successful career and was a bit like, okay, what next? So we had a kind of a moment in time where we just thought, well, it's now or never. Let's just do it. Like I've been waiting for years to do my own thing anyway. So it's like, let's do it. And my criteria, we came up with a few business ideas actually, but the principle from my side was always it's got to be about social and or environmental value. It's got to drive, push the needle on making the world better, as well as just obviously it's got to have scale and work and be a successful business. And what I'd been back in consulting around sustainability, and one of the things we really recognized with our corporate clients was this disconnect between the strategic carbon footprinting assessments and going, right, we've just spent hundreds of thousands of pounds with a consulting firm to do this, and this is what we need to do. And actually talking to the suppliers, especially the smaller ones, and how to get them on board with that message and that journey, which it was really clear that a lot of their footprint, the vast majority of their footprint was in their supply chain, not with them directly. And that strategic approach didn't really then engender any change with the people who they're working with or the small business owners who were part of that wider ecosystem. So that was the change and the break point that we recognized that we wanted to solve for.
Wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that. What is net zero? Why should we be going there?
Sure. I mean, great existential question. So from our point of view at ZeroBees, we follow the science. So the scientists have been telling us for decades that we've got global climate change. And the great news, if there is any in the story, is that there's lots of people going after net zero targets. So the international community, countries and corporates and smaller businesses too have all come around to this idea that actually there is a set of targets around looking at your own emissions and those of your supply chain and trying to reduce them to a point where they're net zero, where effectively you're in balance with nature. You're not emitting more carbon than you're consuming. And that's a great thing. But net zero currently is broken. And the problem with net zero is that there's a lot of targets, but there's not enough action. And what we're seeing is, our experience, you can see it at the international level. You see all the public commitments that are made by governments, and they still don't get us to where we need to get to, that kind of safe zone for humanity, which is below 1.5 degrees to see rise versus our baseline kind of just in the couple of 150 years ago. And the other place where it's broken is in civil society, and especially in the corporate world, where these massively ambitious targets have been set, which is great. But then the people who are going to be changing their behavior to get to net zero mainly is their supply chain. So you look at most corporates, and their emissions are actually between 70 to 95% or even more is sat outside of their direct control. It's with the people who are supplying them and upstream from them as well. So they're so downstream from them in their use phase as well with consumers. And it's there that we actually need to see changes. And for a lot of those businesses, they're disempowered and disengaged from this net zero narrative, and they know how to start. They don't know what to do about it, and it's too expensive, and they just don't understand what the next step is and how they play a role in this big picture stuff. So that's what we at ZeroBees want to do, is we want to help empower people in supply chains to understand what their role is, what their current footprint is, and how to move closer to decarbonisation.
So why should small business owners be worried about this?
Yeah, so what we're seeing right now is there's a lot of voluntary corporate commitments around net zero. And why is that important? That's important because as those voluntary commitments become more regulated, and that we've seen that with TCFD just came into action in the UK this month, and those mean that scope 3 and supply chain emissions are much more front of mind and regulated now in terms of disclosure. When corporates have those as targets, ambitions, and regulated actions to do, then that means that effectively when most of their emissions are in their supply chain, they will be pushing that requirement back into the suppliers. So what we'll see is, as suppliers to corporates, SMEs will start seeing these in RFPs, in invitations to tender. If you want to win business with government as well, and large corporates who have these as requirements, you're going to see them saying, well, we don't actually know what to do. We need you to do it. What are you doing around your carbon footprint? And the people, the SMEs and the suppliers who are on the front foot with it and have an idea of what their impact is, what their products do, what their services emit, and are controlling it, will be the ones who will start to win more business and certainly can help those corporate targets come to life and materially work. And the other side is, from the consumer's point of view, we're seeing this. This is one of the zeitgeists of our time, right? This is a super important, provocative thing that we have a few years to solve. And in a way, the fact that some brands are using "we're going to plant a tree," it shows that there's real consumer demand. I mean, they're not answering it in the right way, but it does show that there's a position there for either brands who have sustainability at their core already, or brands who want to move into the space, or brands who just want to continue operating will be, the third wave. What you're doing around carbon is going to be super important. And actually, what we can see is, for us at ZeroBees especially, we focus on carbon, but it's not a myopic, it's not one lens. There are a lot of issues that are also important besides carbon, but carbon is a very good indicator of what you're doing around other things too. So if you're thinking about offsets, actually you should be looking at co-benefits. What does it mean for biodiversity? If you are, carbon is also it's a diagnostic for the amount of fertilizer that's being used if you're in a food chain, for example, because that's the biggest emitter. It's a diagnostic for how much regenerative agriculture you've got. It also shows how efficient and you're being with your resource base. So it actually is something that consumers can get their head around, but also indicates you're hopefully doing a lot of things in other kind of important resource areas and sustainability areas.
Okay, I can imagine there's people sat listening thinking, I'm terribly overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. I feel awful about myself. I feel awful about my business. I don't want people to be sat there, they're feeling that way. What do you think the first steps are for people feeling that way?
Yeah, so absolutely. That's why we kind of simplify all that sustainability stuff back down to carbon, right? There's an important issue. It's climate. How do we deal with it? And the first thing for us is, work out where your drivers are. Is it your customers? Is it your consumers? Is it your employees? Is it you? Like, what's your kind of main reason for wanting to do something around this? And it might be from all of those areas. And then think about, okay, where am I today? So the first step for us is baselining. Is it really kind of going, I want to understand what my direct and my indirect emissions are. And that's you can either do it, we do a very specific data and science-led way, which is super engaging with your suppliers as well. But yeah, there are other ways which you can go out there, and there are free tools online, especially from government, which help you kind of understand where your material impacts would be. And then it's about thinking about, okay, of the most material ones of those, what can I do as a business owner to influence reduction of those, and hopefully set some targets and think, okay, I need some plans to do that. And thinking about, okay, this could actually save me money. So there's some things in here which will actually be beneficial to the bottom line, as well as saving carbon. There are others which actually might be more costly, but hopefully there's a balance in there, which means that it won't, at the end of the day, hurt your business to do it, and it will only improve the way that you're perceived and the way you operate. And that's going to help you win business, win over customers, retain customers, win employees, and engage your team around what you're doing.
Okay, yeah, that all makes sense. Obviously, you don't want to give the game away too much. This, at the end of the day, this is your business. But what is the best thing that the businesses can look at doing just to get going?
Yeah, I mean, like there's even before, I mean, so I talk about this with other people in the decarbonisation space, right? There's lots of different things. Some businesses actually just doing some actions, even if you don't want to understand it first. I mean, I would always start with, let's understand what your emissions are and where the material areas are, but actually you could just start doing things, right? You could just think about what your travel impact is. Think about if you're making a product where, if it's energy intensive, where those things in your supply chain you think intuitively would be big energy consumption parts, and thinking about how to manage those down. There's lots of things that are intuitively possible to do, but for a lot of people, especially when you think about your wider supply chain, it's quite difficult to get to grips with where the material issues are.
And is there anything that you think is kind of a big issue that people aren't really aware of? Like, do you think there's any secret parts of this that people have no idea that are a problem? They think they're doing everything right and they think they've got it under control, but actually, like, if you look at the facts and figures, it might not be quite as good as they think.
100%. There's quite a few examples of this, actually. One is we've been doing a lot of work with media, and especially digital media, and unpicking what the internet does is really interesting. When you're a digital media agency, looking at millions of impressions to banner ads or to pre-roll or to different formats, that actually each one doesn't have a big impact, but when you're doing millions of them, suddenly you get, that's the big impact from your business. It's not necessarily your central carbon emissions. It's actually what happens on its way, the transmission energy to get it to a data center. Even if that data center is then very efficient, you have large energy losses on the way and in processing it as well. And then the other area that I think is really kind of properly outstanding in terms of the kind of jaw-dropping moment of what on earth are we doing is pensions. And I think, like, there's big players like Make My Money Matter campaign, which is trying to get this message out around pensions and where you invest is really important. And if you think about an average pension size of, say, in the UK, it's about £30,000, or for some people it'll be a lot more, right? It'll be 80, it'll be more money than that. But every year that's invested in something which is emitting some carbon, or is not, right? So you can choose where it's going. And if you look at, there's a few calculations starting to merge around pensions. Make My Money Matter campaign and Cushion as well, who are looking to work towards a net zero pension offer, are saying that actually an individual's pension on average can be around 26 tons of carbon. Now, wow. That, when you think about actually what we are starting, it's becoming kind of public knowledge around our individual footprint is, well, generally our footprint is somewhere between 8 and 11 tons in the UK, something like that, or 12 tons. Oh my goodness. So actually my pension, if I've got one, could be double that. What? And that's like mind blowing. Like, so the biggest thing you could actually do today is don't fly to Australia 50 times this year. But actually, a really big thing you could do is actually think about where your pension is invested. And in one go, you could, it's going to be very hard to mitigate that to nothing, but you could lose a few tons quite easily just by thinking about where your pension is and getting it out of the things that you wouldn't want it to be invested in.
That's really, really interesting. I never would have thought of that. And I think there'll probably be a lot of people sat listening who are thinking the same. So obviously there's a few ways that you can go about achieving net zero. One of the ways that I feel like we're seeing quite a lot at the moment has a lot of people quite skeptical. So things like, buy something from us and we'll plant a tree. Is that actually a good thing to be doing?
Oh goodness, that's one of my pet topics. I love this topic. So I've got a very strong view on carbon offsetting, which is effectively what planting a tree should be if it's done in the right way. But there's a whole swathe of greenwashing out there, which is around, and sometimes it's really well intentioned, right? I think planting the tree notion, even if it's not backed by science by a particular brand, it's a great notion, right? So it kind of is a nice thing, I hope, if it's done in the right frame of mind. But you do have to, like, planting a tree doesn't Like, what is the point? What's the science? I want to just hear what's the science behind that assertion that that's going to be a good thing. Is it just a marketing ploy? We're planting a tree. Like, okay, great. Or what does that mean? Have I planted an acorn in the back garden? What does it, for it to sequester carbon, it needs to grow and have canopy cover in 25 years time. Planting a tree now, have you invested in that to be still there in 30 years so that the carbon's there? And what happens in 100 years? Like, what does that do? So there's lots of things. Like, the right way to go about carbon credits and carbon sequestration is to go, okay, we have first of all reduced our carbon as much as we possibly can now. That is the one thing that every business should be thinking about before they make any claims. Like, what are we doing about our carbon emissions, our direct ones and our scope and our supply chain emissions? Then you can say, right, we have a residual amount of carbon or greenhouse gas emissions. What do we want to do about those? And yes, there is a viable place to go where you say, actually, I want to invest in carbon, in climate positive solutions in order to recognize that I can't get my carbon emissions down to zero today. And that's great. Then you think about, okay, where do I want to invest? I want to invest in appropriate carbon offsetting schemes where it's very clearly documented that when you spend money on carbon, it can't be resold to someone else. It's traceable. It'll still be there. It'll have permanence. It'll still be there in decades to come. It'll actually do what you want it to do. And hopefully it'll have some co-benefits as well, like biodiversity and other things. If you're just saying I'm planting a tree, what does that mean? And that might be, that phrase, very acceptable. Lots of people can get it. It might mean that it's based on all of that science and it's completely like robust and fantastic. My worry is that there's a lot of those claims that are not based on anything.
All right, Toby, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm hoping that everyone has definitely taken something away from that. And yeah, great to chat.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.